There comes a quiet moment in the journey of awakening that almost no one prepares you for, because it cannot be explained by the language of striving or success or self-improvement. It arrives softly, without drama, without fireworks, without the applause of the world. It feels like standing in an open field after a storm has passed, when the air is so still that even your thoughts seem to pause out of respect. In that moment, you may notice something that startles you, not fear, not sadness, but a gentle absence. A sense that the old urgency to be someone, to be known, to be defined, has simply loosened its grip. And the mind, which has been trained to label everything, might whisper, "This feels like I don't want to exist anymore." But that whisper misunderstands what is happening. This is not a desire to leave life. It is a remembrance that you were never confined to the narrow idea of a self in the first place. When awakening deepens, the ego does not disappear in a dramatic collapse. It fades like a shadow at dusk. You don't fight it, you don't defeat it. It simply becomes unnecessary. The stories you once carried so tightly, who you are, what you've been through, what you must become, begin to feel heavy, like clothing worn long after the season has changed. And in that shedding, there can be a strange, beautiful emptiness. Not the emptiness of lack, but the emptiness of spaciousness. Like an empty cup that is finally ready to be filled with something far greater than the noise of identity. This is where many people become confused. They have spent their entire lives believing that existence requires constant effort, constant proof, constant reinforcement. The ego has convinced them that to exist is to perform, to compare, to defend, to accumulate. So when that machinery quiets down, the nervous system searches for something to cling to. The mind asks, if I am not striving, who am I? If I am not chasing meaning, what is my purpose? If I no longer feel the need to announce myself to the world, do I still matter? And the answer, spoken not in words but in awareness, is profoundly simple. You matter more than ever, because you are no longer confusing your worth with your noise. There is a sacred misunderstanding that happens at this stage. People think awakening should feel like constant bliss, endless joy, perpetual inspiration. But awakening is not an emotional high. It is a release from emotional dependency. It is not about feeling more. It is about needing less. Less validation, less approval, less explanation, less resistance to what is. And when the need to exist as a separate, defended entity dissolves, what remains is not nothing. What remains is life itself, moving through you without obstruction. Imagine a river that has been dammed for years by beliefs, fears, and labels. The water is still there, but it is constrained, controlled, forced into narrow channels. When awakening occurs, the dam does not explode. It is quietly removed. And suddenly the river flows as it was always meant to flow, wide, effortless, unconcerned with its own name. The river does not wake up each morning asking if it deserves to exist. It does not compare itself to other rivers. It does not cling to its past path. It simply flows. And in that flowing, it nourishes everything it touches. This is the stage where the soul begins to recognize itself beyond form. You start to sense that what you truly are cannot be captured by a role, a title, a personality, or even a spiritual identity. You are not the thinker of thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise and dissolve. You are not the body. You are the life animating it. You are not the story. You are the silence that remains when the story rests. And when this recognition settles in, there can be a deep longing not to disappear from the world, but to stop pretending to be separate from it. The ego resists this stage because it survives on distinction. It needs edges. It needs boundaries. It needs a me and a them. Awakening softens those edges. You begin to feel less like a fragment and more like a field. Less like a wave struggling against other waves and more like the ocean expressing itself in countless forms. And the ego interprets this as annihilation because it cannot comprehend unity. But the soul recognizes it as homecoming. There is great healing in realizing that you do not need to announce your existence to justify it. The sun does not wake up and declare its importance. The flower does not apologize for blooming. The stars do not compete for attention in the night sky. They simply are. And in their being, they serve the whole. When you stop trying to exist as an idea and allow yourself to exist as presence, life begins to move through you with a natural intelligence that requires no effort. This is why the emptiness you feel after awakening is not something to be feared. It is the empty space left behind when the false self steps aside. It is the silence after the mind has exhausted its arguments. It is the pause between breaths where peace lives. And in that emptiness, you may notice a tenderness, a gentleness, a compassion that was always there but drowned out by the noise of becoming. You listen more. You react less. You love without agenda. You forgive without keeping score. You no longer need to be right because being right was never the point. At this stage, forgiveness becomes effortless, not because you approve of what happened, but because you see that holding resentment requires a rigid self to protect. When that rigidity softens, there is nothing left to defend. You understand deeply and without spiritual bypassing that resentment is a story the ego tells to justify its separation. And when separation dissolves, resentment loses its foundation. There are no justified resentments because there is no isolated self that needs justification. Living in the now ceases to be a practice and becomes a natural state. Not because you force yourself to stay present, but because the past no longer defines you and the future no longer controls you. You realize that the only place life has ever been willing to meet you is here, in this breath, in this moment, in this awareness. And when you rest here, truly rest, the compulsion to escape existence falls away. You do not want to disappear. You want to arrive fully without the burden of who you thought you had to be. This is the paradox of awakening. The less you try to exist as someone, the more alive you feel as everything. The less you cling to identity, the more authentic your expression becomes. You stop performing life and start participating in it. You speak when there is something true to say, not when silence threatens your sense of importance. You act when action is aligned, not when restlessness demands movement. You trust the intelligence that beats your heart and grows the trees and turns the planets without ever consulting the ego. And in this trust, a deep inner freedom emerges. Freedom from the need to prove. Freedom from the fear of disappearing. Freedom from the belief that your value depends on visibility. You understand that you are already enough, not because you have achieved something, but because you are an expression of the same creative force that animates all life. Nothing in nature strives to be worthy. It simply fulfills its function. And your function, at the deepest level, is to be conscious, loving presence in whatever form life chooses to express through you. So if you find yourself in this quiet stage where the desire to exist as a separate self is fading, do not rush to label it or fix it. Do not mistake peace for emptiness or silence for absence. This is not a withdrawal from life. It is an intimacy with life. You are learning to live without the armor of ego, without the noise of constant self-reference. You are discovering that you do not need to disappear to be free. You only need to let go of who you were never meant to be. And as you rest in this understanding, life will continue, simpler, truer, lighter. You will still laugh, still create, still love, still serve. But you will do so without the invisible weight of identity pressing down on every moment. You will exist, yes, but not as a problem to be solved or a story to be defended. You will exist as presence itself, quietly, powerfully, unmistakably alive, flowing with the same wisdom that has always known exactly how to be. And as this quiet unfolding continues, something even more subtle begins to reveal itself. You notice that life no longer feels like a task you must complete or a puzzle you must solve. It feels more like a melody you are listening to from the inside. You are not outside the music trying to understand it. You are inside it, moving as it moves, resting when it rests, rising when it rises. The old urgency to control the rhythm fades, and with it goes the fear that something essential might be lost if you stop trying. You begin to sense, perhaps for the first time, that nothing real has ever depended on your effort to hold it together. This is where the mind may attempt one last subtle maneuver. It may say, if I no longer strive, will I become passive? If I stop defining myself, will I disappear into nothingness? But awareness smiles gently at these questions because it knows the truth that words struggle to carry. You are not dissolving into nothing. You are dissolving into everything. The drop does not lose itself when it falls into the ocean. It loses only the illusion that it was ever separate from the ocean in the first place. And in this realization, there is a deep compassion that begins to awaken not just for others, but for yourself. You look back at the years spent proving, striving, defending, and you no longer judge them harshly. You see them as necessary steps, as the costume the soul wore while learning how to remember itself. You forgive yourself for the moments you tried too hard, for the times you believed you had to earn love, for the years you mistook exhaustion for purpose. Forgiveness here is not an act, it is a recognition that you were always doing the best you could with the level of awareness available at the time. As identity loosens, you may notice that emotions still arise, but they pass through more freely. Sadness no longer feels like a threat to your existence. Joy no longer needs to be captured or prolonged. Fear may still knock on the door, but it no longer takes over the house. You have learned something essential. Feelings are weather, not the sky. Thoughts are visitors, not residents. And you, at your core, are the spaciousness that allows all of it to come and go without being diminished. This is where healing truly deepens. Not the healing that fixes a broken self, but the healing that reveals there was never anything broken at all. You begin to understand that much of what you called suffering was resistance to what is. A refusal to let life be as it is in this moment. When resistance dissolves, suffering loses its grip. Pain may still arise, but it is no longer layered with the story of why me, or this shouldn't be happening. It becomes sensation, information, movement, nothing more, nothing less. You start to live with a quiet reverence for ordinary moments, the way light enters a room, the sound of your own breathing, the simple presence of another human being without needing to extract anything from them. You realize that enlightenment was never about transcending life, it was about finally inhabiting it fully, honestly, without the filter of who you thought you were supposed to be. At this stage, the desire not to exist transforms itself into something far more accurate. The desire not to pretend you are separate, not to pretend you are incomplete, not to pretend you must constantly become something else to justify your presence here. You see that existence does not require effort, it requires allowance. Life is already happening, awareness is already present, love is already flowing. The only thing that ever stood in the way was the belief that you had to manage it all. And so you begin to trust, not blindly, not naively, but deeply. You trust the same intelligence that digests your food without instruction, that heals a wound without your involvement, that orchestrates the vast movements of the universe without ever asking your permission. You stop micromanaging your own becoming. You allow yourself to be lived by something wiser than the thinking mind. This is not surrender as defeat, it is surrender as alignment. In this alignment, your actions become simpler and more powerful. You speak from clarity rather than compulsion. You help not to feel needed, but because compassion naturally expresses itself when there is no ego blocking the flow. You rest without guilt. You say no without explanation. You say yes without fear. You no longer need life to look a certain way in order to feel at peace, because peace is no longer dependent on conditions. And perhaps most quietly miraculous of all, love changes its shape. It is no longer something you fall into and out of. It is no longer something you barter for or protect. Love becomes your natural state of perception. You see others not as roles or projections, but as expressions of the same consciousness looking back at itself through different eyes. This does not make you detached. It makes you profoundly intimate with life. You feel connected without clinging. You care without controlling. You give without losing yourself. So when the mind returns to that old phrase, the desire not to exist, you can meet it with gentleness and understanding. You can hear what it is really saying. It is not asking for annihilation. It is asking for truth. It is asking for rest from the exhausting job of being someone. It is asking to lay down the mask and breathe as awareness itself. And here, in this breath, in this moment, you discover that you are not disappearing at all. You are arriving as presence, arriving as peace, arriving as the quiet knowing that you are not a fragment struggling through a hostile world, but an expression of a living, intelligent universe learning to experience itself through form. You exist, yes, but not as a story that must be maintained. You exist as the space in which all stories appear and fade. You exist as the stillness beneath movement, the silence beneath sound, the love beneath every form of fear. And in this realization, the longing to dissolve the false self is fulfilled, not by leaving life, but by finally living it, without resistance, without pretense, and without the weight of an identity that was never truly you. And as you settle even more deeply into this way of being, something profoundly stabilizing begins to take root. The quiet is no longer unfamiliar. The stillness no longer feels like a void that needs to be filled. It becomes a trusted companion, a gentle presence that reminds you that nothing essential is missing. You notice that when the mind grows silent, life does not stop. In fact, it becomes richer, more textured, more alive. Without the constant narration of the ego, experience feels direct, immediate, unfiltered. Colors seem softer yet more vivid. Sounds arrive without interpretation. Moments unfold without needing to be named. You begin to understand that awareness does not need content to justify itself. Silence is not the absence of life. It is the field from which life arises. And in that field, you are held without effort. This is where the soul exhales. This is where the nervous system learns that it is safe to rest. Safe to stop scanning for threats. Safe to stop proving worth. Safe to stop asking, am I enough? Because the question itself has dissolved. At this stage, the idea of identity starts to feel almost quaint, like an old coat you once wore out of habit rather than necessity. You can still put it on when life calls for it. You can function, speak, choose, respond, but you are no longer inside it. You wear identity lightly, like a role in a play you know is temporary. And because you are no longer confused about who you are no longer afraid of losing who you are. There is an enormous freedom in this. A freedom that does not announce itself loudly, but quietly transforms everything. You may notice that time feels different now. The past no longer pulls at you with the same emotional gravity. The future no longer feels like a cliff you must constantly prepare to jump from. Time becomes something you move through, not something that moves against you. You realize that most suffering was never about what happened, but about the story you carried forward and rehearsed endlessly. When the storyteller rests, the story loosens. And in that loosening, the present moment reveals itself as more than enough. This is where gratitude begins to arise without effort. Not gratitude as a practice, not gratitude as a list, but gratitude as a natural response to seeing clearly. You are grateful not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer arguing with reality. You are grateful because you see how much energy was once spent resisting what is, and how little is required now to simply allow life to unfold. Even challenges are met differently. They are no longer enemies to defeat or obstacles to resent. They are movements within consciousness, passing experiences that no longer define you. You start to sense that the soul always knew this, that beneath every search, every ambition, every attempt to become something, there was a quiet knowing whispering, you don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to add anything. You don't need to fix yourself to belong here. Awakening is not the acquisition of wisdom. It is the removal of what was never true. It is the peeling away of assumptions until only what is real remains. And what remains is astonishingly simple. Presence, awareness, being, not as concepts, but as lived reality. You are here, breathing, sensing, aware. Nothing more is required. The desire to disappear dissolves because you realize you were never trapped in existence to begin with. You were trapped in an idea about existence. And now that idea has loosened, softened, faded. There is a deep humility that comes with this recognition. You no longer feel the need to elevate yourself above others or compare your awakening to anyone else's path. You see that every being is moving at the exact pace required for their own remembering. Judgment fades because judgment requires separation. Superiority fades because it was built on insecurity. What remains is respect for life, for timing, for the intelligence that moves through all things. In this space, service becomes effortless. You no longer help others to feel valuable or needed. You help because love moves naturally when it is unobstructed. Sometimes that help is action. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is simply being fully present with another human being without trying to fix them. You understand now that presence itself is healing. That being deeply with someone, without agenda or projection, is one of the greatest gifts you can offer. And so the awakening continues, not upward, not outward, but inward and inward still, deeper into simplicity, deeper into truth, deeper into the realization that you are not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Life no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening as you, through you, with you. You rest more often now, not because you are tired, but because you no longer believe rest must be earned. You allow joy when it comes and let it go when it leaves. You allow sadness without building an identity around it. You allow uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. You trust the unfolding, even when the path is unclear, because you have seen what happens when you stop interfering with the natural intelligence of life. And quietly, gently, without fanfare, you realize that this was always the point, not to become extraordinary, but to remember the ordinariness that is sacred. Not to transcend humanity, but to inhabit it fully without the burden of ego. Not to stop existing, but to stop resisting existence as it is. You are here, you are aware, you are alive, and nothing else needs to be added to make this moment complete. And with this balance, something settles that feels almost like gravity returning in a gentler form. You are not floating away from life, you are landing inside it. The earlier sense of dissolving, of thinning out, now reveals its deeper purpose. It was never meant to leave you ungrounded. It was meant to clear the noise so that you could finally feel the quiet solidity of being, not the heaviness of obligation, but the steadiness of presence. You discover that awakening does not remove you from the world. It places you more firmly within it, but without the friction of resistance. You begin to sense a rhythm to this unfolding. Expansion followed by grounding. Silence followed by engagement. Stillness followed by movement. The ego once tried to control this rhythm, insisting that growth must always look like forward motion, upward motion, constant motion. Now you see that life breathes, just as you do. There is an in-breath of awareness, a retreat into quiet, and there is an out-breath of expression, action, and relationship. Balance is not something you manufacture. It is something you allow by no longer interfering. At this stage, the fear of losing yourself gives way to a surprising realization. You were never truly present before. You are always leaning into the next moment or bracing against the last. Now, presence has weight. It has texture. You feel yourself inhabiting your body without needing to escape it. Sensation is no longer a distraction from spirituality. It is an entry point into it. The simple act of standing, walking, breathing becomes intimate, sacred, whole. You also begin to notice that clarity does not demand certainty. The ego was addicted to answers, to definitions, to conclusions. Awareness is comfortable with openness. You no longer rush to name what is happening or to fit it into a spiritual framework. You trust that understanding unfolds in layers and that not knowing is not a failure, but a doorway. Mystery stops being threatening and starts feeling like companionship. Life does not need to be solved to be lived. Here, compassion deepens again, but this time it is balanced with discernment. You do not absorb everything. You do not rescue everyone. You do not sacrifice your inner stillness to meet the chaos of the world. Instead, you meet life from center. You engage without entanglement. You care without collapsing. You give without depletion. This is not detachment. It is alignment. You are learning how to remain rooted in awareness while participating fully in human experience. You see now why the earlier longing to disappear arose. It was the psyche's way of saying, I cannot continue at this pace of self-definition. It was not a rejection of life, but a rejection of fragmentation. And now, as integration occurs, that longing softens into something more mature, more embodied. A quiet willingness to be here without armor, to exist without commentary, to live without the constant inner narration of who you are supposed to be. Balance also reveals itself in how you relate to thought. You do not silence the mind, you befriend it. Thoughts come and go, but they no longer dictate your identity. You use the mind when it is useful and set it down when it is not. There is no war within you anymore. No part of you is being pushed away in the name of spirituality. Everything is included. Nothing is idolized. This inclusion is what creates stability. You may notice that your sense of purpose shifts here. Purpose is no longer a destination you are racing toward. It becomes a quality you bring to whatever is in front of you. Presence becomes purpose. Integrity becomes purpose. Kindness becomes purpose. You stop asking, what am I meant to do with my life? And start living in a way that lets life express itself through you naturally. And in doing so, you often find yourself doing exactly what is needed without strain. This is where awakening matures. It stops being an inner event and becomes a way of living. You pay attention, you listen, you respond rather than react. You notice when you are drifting into old patterns and gently return without judgment, without drama. Balance is maintained not through effort, but through awareness. Awareness notices imbalance before it becomes suffering. And so the journey continues, not as a dramatic ascent or a final arrival, but as a living, breathing equilibrium. You are awake enough to see through illusion, grounded enough to live in form, humble enough to keep learning, and present enough to keep loving. The ego is no longer the driver, but it has not been exiled. It has been re-educated. It serves rather than rules. You no longer want to disappear, and you no longer need to assert yourself. You simply remain open, available, rooted. And in this remaining, life flows through you with a quiet confidence that does not seek recognition. You are here fully, without excess and without lack. The plot does not rush forward or collapse inward. It breathes, and you breathe with it. Balance between being and becoming, silence and expression, emptiness and form, exactly where you are meant to be. There is a quiet place within you that has never been hurried, never been anxious, never been afraid of time. It is the part of you that existed before the first worry ever crossed your mind, before you learned to measure your worth by outcomes, deadlines, or approval. And it is from this place that I want to speak to you now, not to your fear, not to your racing thoughts, but to the still awareness beneath them. Because the truth is simple, even if the mind resists it, God has not left you. Life is not punishing you. And this waiting you are experiencing is not a mistake, it is a sacred pause, an invitation to remember who you are beyond thought. So many people struggle while they wait, waiting for answers, for healing, for love, for direction, for clarity, for a sign that they are on the right path. And in that waiting, the mind begins to overwork, to analyze, to replay the past and rehearse the future, as if vigilance alone could summon peace. But overthinking does not protect you. It does not prepare you. It does not bring you closer to truth. It only creates noise where guidance is meant to be heard. The soul does not shout, it whispers. And whispers cannot be heard in a storm of mental chatter. You were not created to live in constant tension with life. You were not designed to wrestle reality into submission. The universe does not require your anxiety to function properly. God does not need your panic to fulfill what is already unfolding. When you try to force outcomes with the mind, you unknowingly step out of alignment with the intelligence that has been guiding your breath, your heartbeat, and your existence since the moment you arrived here. That intelligence has not failed you. It has not abandoned you. It has simply been waiting for you to stop interfering with fear and start cooperating with trust. Notice how nature waits without worry. A seed does not overthink whether it will become a tree. It does not compare itself to other seeds. It does not panic because the soil is dark or the process feels slow. It rests in the certainty of what it is. And because it does not resist the process, it grows. You, too, carry this same certainty within you. But the ego, the false self that believes it must control everything to be safe, has convinced you that waiting is dangerous, that not knowing is unacceptable, that stillness is a threat. And so the mind keeps spinning, believing that if it just thinks a little more, worries a little harder, plans a little tighter, peace will finally arrive. But peace does not arrive through mental effort. Peace is revealed when effort falls away. Waiting is not a punishment. Waiting is preparation, not preparation for something outside of you, but preparation for a deeper alignment within you. In the waiting, life is softening you, quieting you, detaching you from illusions you once believed you needed. In the waiting, you are being guided away from outcomes that no longer match who you are becoming. And the mind resists this because it is attached to old identities, old timelines, old definitions of success and worth. The ego says, I should be further along by now. The soul says, you are exactly where you need to be. You are not behind, you are not late, you are not forgotten. These are stories created by a mind that has mistaken time for truth. God does not operate on your calendar. The universe does not rush what must unfold organically. What is meant for you is not delayed, it is ripening. And just as fruit cannot be forced to sweeten before its time, your life cannot be hurried into alignment without losing its nourishment. Overthinking is the mind's attempt to replace faith with control. But faith is not blind belief, it is alignment with what already is. It is the deep inner knowing that life is happening for you, not to you. It is the willingness to rest in uncertainty without labeling it as danger. When you stop fighting the present moment, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel supported again. Not because circumstances suddenly change, but because you reconnect with the source of peace that was never dependent on circumstances in the first place. God is not somewhere else, waiting for you to get it right. God is the awareness reading these words. God is the quiet presence beneath your thoughts. God is the stillness that remains when you stop narrating your fears. And when you remember this, waiting transforms from a burden into a sanctuary. It becomes a place where you can breathe again, where you can loosen your grip, where you can allow life to meet you halfway instead of chasing it in circles. The ego thrives on tension. It feeds on comparison, urgency, and imagined catastrophes. It tells you that if you relax, you will miss something, that if you stop worrying, something will go wrong. But look honestly at your life. Has worry ever truly saved you? Or has it only stolen moments that could have been lived in peace? The ego does not want you present because presence dissolves its authority. In the now, fear has no future to project and no past to regret. In the now, you are free. Healing does not happen by obsessing over what is broken. Healing happens when you stop identifying with the wound and start identifying with the awareness that observes it. You are not your thoughts. You are not your fears. You are not the stories you replay about what should have happened or what might happen next. You are the space in which all of this appears, and that space is calm, infinite, and untouched by time. When you wait without trust, waiting feels like stagnation. But when you wait with faith, waiting becomes incubation. Something is forming within you: clarity, resilience, wisdom, compassion. And these qualities cannot be rushed. They emerge naturally when you stop demanding immediate answers and start listening inwardly. The guidance you seek is not hidden, it is simply quiet. And the quieter you become, the clearer it gets. Let go of the idea that you must figure everything out before you can feel at peace. Peace is not the reward for solving life's puzzles. It is the foundation from which solutions emerge. When you calm the mind, you allow intuition to lead. When you release the need to control outcomes, you align with outcomes that feel effortless. Life begins to move again, not through struggle, but through flow. You were never meant to carry the weight of the universe on your shoulders. You were meant to participate in it, to dance with it, to trust it. The moment you stop forcing, you start receiving. The moment you stop resisting the present, you start experiencing the miracle of being alive. And this is where God has always been with you, as you, through you. Waiting does not mean nothing is happening. It means something deeper is happening beneath the surface. Roots are growing. Foundations are being strengthened. Old attachments are dissolving. And when the time is right, when you are aligned not just in desire but in consciousness, what is meant for you will arrive without struggle, without panic, without fear. You will not have to chase it. You will not have to convince it. You will simply recognize it. So breathe, soften your body, release the tension in your mind. You are safe in this moment. You are supported in ways you cannot yet see, and you are guided by an intelligence far greater than your thoughts. Trust that. Rest in that. And remember, God has never stepped away from you. You have only momentarily stepped away from stillness. Return now. Everything you are waiting for begins there. And as you rest more deeply into this remembering, you may begin to notice something subtle yet profound. The waiting itself starts to change its texture. What once felt heavy begins to feel spacious. What once felt like absence begins to reveal itself as presence. This is because the moment you stop arguing with life, life stops arguing with you. Resistance dissolves, and in its place arises a gentle cooperation with what is. You are no longer standing outside the river demanding it flow faster. You are allowing yourself to be carried, trusting that the current knows where it is going. There is a great freedom that comes when you no longer demand guarantees from the future. The mind wants contracts, timelines, assurances carved in stone. The soul asks only for openness, and openness is the doorway through which grace enters. When you soften your insistence on certainty, you make room for miracles that could never fit inside rigid expectations. Life is creative, not mechanical. It unfolds through possibility, not prediction. And when you loosen your grip, you begin to feel the quiet excitement of being surprised by goodness. You may discover that much of what you called waiting was actually an opportunity to unlearn. To unlearn the belief that your value is measured by progress alone. To unlearn the habit of scanning the horizon for proof that you are safe. To unlearn the assumption that stillness is synonymous with stagnation. In truth, stillness is where clarity is born. It is where the fog lifts, not because you chased it away, but because you stop feeding it with anxious attention. There is an intelligence within you that does not require effort to operate. It coordinates billions of cells, synchronizes breath and heartbeat, and guides healing without consulting your mental commentary. That same intelligence is orchestrating the timing of your life. When you align with it, you feel a sense of rightness that cannot be logically explained. Things happen at the right moment, conversations arise naturally, doors open without force. This is not luck. This is alignment. This is what happens when you stop micromanaging existence and start trusting the wisdom that sustains it. The mind often asks, what if I'm doing nothing while something should be happening? But the deeper question is, what if something essential is happening because I am doing nothing? There is a kind of action that only occurs through allowing. Just as the night allows the body to restore itself through sleep, your life restores itself when you allow periods of non-doing. In these moments, you are not falling behind, you are recalibrating. You are returning to center. And from this center, a new quality of action eventually emerges. Not frantic, not forced, not fueled by fear of missing out, but calm, precise, and inspired. You begin to act from clarity rather than compulsion. You move because it feels right, not because you are afraid of standing still. This is the difference between pushing a locked door and waiting for it to open. One exhausts you, the other invites you in. There is nothing passive about trust. Trust is an active alignment with reality. It is the choice to believe that life is fundamentally supportive, even when it does not conform to your expectations. It is the courage to release resentment toward time itself, because time is not your enemy. Time is the canvas upon which your becoming is painted. And every moment you spend resisting it is a moment you miss inhabiting it. As you continue to wait, notice how life continues to show up in small ways. A breath that feels a little deeper, a moment of calm you did not have yesterday, a subtle insight that changes how you see an old problem. These are not insignificant. They are signs that alignment is already happening. The universe does not announce its work with fanfare. It whispers through quiet shifts, gentle nudges, and moments of ease that feel almost ordinary until you realize how different you feel inside them. You are learning to live from being rather than becoming. To understand that your worth does not arrive in the future with an achievement or an answer. It is present now, inherent, unshakable. When you know this, waiting loses its sting. It becomes simply another way of being with life, another expression of trust, another chapter in a story that does not need to be rushed to be meaningful. And in this space, you may feel a deeper compassion for yourself, for the times you panicked, for the times you tried to control what could not be controlled, for the times you doubted the very force that has carried you this far. Compassion is not indulgence, it is clarity. It allows you to see that every misstep was an attempt to feel safe. Every worry, a misguided prayer for reassurance. When you see this, judgment softens and healing flows naturally. So stay here a little longer, in the quiet, in the trust, in the gentle unfolding. There is nothing you need to add to this moment to make it complete. You are already participating fully in life simply by being aware. And from this awareness, everything that needs to come will come, not as a reward for your patience, but as a reflection of your alignment. And as this awareness deepens, you may begin to sense a gentle reorientation taking place inside you, as if an inner compass is quietly correcting itself without instruction. You are no longer leaning forward into the future or pulling backward into the past. You are settling into the vertical axis of now, where life is actually lived. From here, everything feels less urgent and more meaningful, not because nothing matters, but because everything is finally seen in its proper proportion. The small worries that once dominated your thoughts begin to loosen their grip, not through resistance, but through irrelevance. There is a sacred intelligence in timing that the ego cannot comprehend. The ego wants speed because it believes arrival will bring relief. The soul understands rhythm and knows that relief comes from harmony, not haste. When you attune yourself to this rhythm, you stop interpreting pauses as rejection. You begin to see them as breath marks in the music of your life, necessary silences that give shape and beauty to the melody. Without them, the song would be noise. You may notice that as you trust more, you strive less. And in that lessening of effort, you paradoxically become more effective, more present, more alive. Your actions are no longer driven by the fear of falling behind, but by a quiet inner resonance that says now. And when action arises from this place, it carries a different energy. It does not exhaust you. It does not fragment you. It feels clean, simple, and aligned, as though life itself is moving through you rather than being pushed by you. Waiting, then, is revealed as a teacher. It teaches you discernment, how to tell the difference between intuition and impulse, between inspiration and anxiety. It teaches you humility, reminding you that you are a participant in life, not its manager. And it teaches you faith not as a concept to be believed, but as an experience to be lived. Faith becomes the felt sense that you are held, even when you cannot see how. The mind may still attempt to intrude with old questions. What if this doesn't work out? What if I miss my chance? But these questions lose their urgency when you realize that what is truly meant for you cannot be missed. It is not fragile. It does not depend on perfect timing or flawless decisions. It arrives through alignment, not anxiety. And alignment is always available in this moment, regardless of what the external world appears to be doing. You begin to understand that peace is not something you achieve after life finally settles down. Peace is the ground from which you meet life as it is. And from this ground, even uncertainty feels different. It feels alive rather than threatening, expansive rather than constricting. You stop demanding that life explain itself to you in advance. You allow it to unfold, trusting that clarity reveals itself in sequence, not all at once. There is a quiet joy in this way of living. Not the loud excitement that depends on outcomes, but a steady contentment that comes from being in right relationship with yourself. You stop outsourcing your sense of okayness to future events. You stop postponing your wholeness. You recognize that nothing needs to be added to you for you to be complete. You are already enough, not as an affirmation to repeat, but as a truth to inhabit. And from this knowing, compassion naturally extends outward. You see others caught in the same urgency, the same overthinking, the same restless search for certainty. And instead of judging, you understand. You know what it feels like to believe that peace is always just one step ahead. This understanding softens you. It makes you kinder, more patient, more forgiving, not because you are trying to be, but because separation no longer makes sense. You are learning to live as an expression of trust rather than a collection of strategies. To move with life instead of against it. To listen more than you plan. To allow more than you force. This does not make you passive. It makes you powerful in a quieter, more enduring way. Power rooted in alignment does not need to announce itself. It is felt in the ease of your presence, the clarity of your choices, the steadiness of your heart. And so the waiting continues, but now it feels different. It is no longer something you endure. It is something you inhabit with grace. You are not marking time. You are meeting it fully. Each moment becomes sufficient unto itself, not because it promises something else, but because it is alive, whole, and complete. And in this completeness, you finally recognize what has been true all along. You were never waiting for life to begin. Life has been waiting for you to arrive fully here. And as you arrive more fully here, you may notice that something subtle but unmistakable begins to dissolve the quiet fear that life is happening somewhere else, that meaning is delayed, that fulfillment is conditional. This fear has lived so long in the background that you may have mistaken it for reality. Yet now, in this softened awareness, it loses its authority. You begin to sense that meaning is not postponed until circumstances improve. Meaning is revealed the moment you stop resisting what is. There is a deep relief in realizing that you do not have to earn your place in the universe. You are not on probation with life. You were invited into existence because you belong here. And this belonging is not revoked when things are unclear or when progress feels slow. It is constant, unwavering, unconditional. When you feel this, even briefly, the nervous urgency to prove yourself relaxes. You stop negotiating your worth with outcomes. You rest into the simple truth of being. Waiting from this vantage point becomes intimate. It is no longer an empty hallway you pace in impatience. It is a quiet room where you meet yourself more honestly. You begin to hear your own inner guidance, not as commands or demands, but as gentle inclinations, subtle movements of energy that suggest rather than insist. And because they are not loud, you can miss them if you are rushing. But when you slow down, they become unmistakable. You may notice that what you truly long for beneath all the questions is not answers, but reassurance. Not certainty, but connection. Not control, but peace. And peace does not come from resolving every unknown. It comes from trusting the presence that remains steady amid the unknown. This presence is not outside you, waiting to be accessed someday. It is the very awareness through which you are experiencing this moment. The ego has taught you to believe that vigilance is love, that worrying means you care, that thinking endlessly about problems proves responsibility. But love is spacious, love is calm, love does not grip. When you stop overthinking, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are returning to clarity. You are allowing intelligence to operate without interference. And intelligence, when unobstructed, moves with elegance and precision. As this becomes your way of being, you may find that patience arises naturally, without effort. You are no longer counting the days until something changes. You are inhabiting the days as they are. And in doing so, you discover that life has been generous all along, offering moments of beauty, insight, and connection that were previously overlooked because your attention was elsewhere. There is a humility that emerges here, not the kind that diminishes you, but the kind that frees you. You no longer assume that you know how things should unfold. You allow yourself to be taught by experience rather than trying to instruct it. And in this openness, life reveals possibilities you could not have planned, pathways you could not have predicted, outcomes more fitting than those you once tried to force. You may notice that when you stop pushing, something else begins to pull, not with urgency, but with quiet inevitability. The right conversations, the right impulses, the right opportunities begin to appear, not as dramatic interventions, but as natural progressions. They feel right in the body before they make sense in the mind. This is how alignment announces itself, through ease, resonance, and a subtle sense of recognition. And so you continue, not with impatience, but with presence. Not with fear, but with faith that is felt rather than declared. You are learning to trust life at the pace it unfolds, to honor the wisdom of timing, to release the belief that struggle is required for things to be meaningful. You discover that what is meant for you moves toward you just as surely as you move toward it, meeting you at the precise intersection of readiness and grace. In this way, waiting becomes an act of devotion, not to an external outcome, but to the truth of who you are beneath the noise. You are no longer waiting to be saved by the future. You are being sustained by the present. And from this sustaining presence, everything that needs to emerge will do so quietly, naturally, and without strain, because it is not being dragged into existence by fear, but welcomed into being by trust. And now, as this quiet understanding settles more deeply into you, there is nothing left to reach for, nothing left to resolve, only a gentle invitation to remain with the breath as it enters and leaves without effort, to remain with the awareness that has been steady through every change, every doubt, every season of your life. You begin to sense that this awareness has never been hurried, never been confused, never been separated from the source of all things. It has simply been waiting for you to notice it again. There is a tenderness that arises here, a softness toward life itself. You no longer need to interrogate every moment for signs of progress. You no longer need to demand that the universe prove its loyalty to you. You feel, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that you are being lived as much as you are living, that something wiser than the thinking mind is gently shaping your path, not through force, but through invitation. And you realize that this wisdom has always been present, even in the moments you believed you were lost. Waiting no longer feels like standing still. It feels like being held by an intelligence that knows when to move and when to pause, when to open a door and when to strengthen the hinge. You understand now that silence is not empty. It is full of guidance. Stillness is not absence. It is presence without distraction. And in this presence, fear has nothing to cling to. It dissolves not because it is fought, but because it is no longer believed. You may notice a quiet gratitude emerging, not for everything turning out as planned, but for everything unfolding as it must. Gratitude for the unseen protections, the redirections you once resisted, the delays that spared you from paths that no longer matched who you are becoming. You see now that even the unanswered prayers carried wisdom, shaping your character, deepening your compassion, preparing you for a fuller expression of yourself. There is a deep exhale here, as if the soul itself has been holding its breath for years and has finally remembered it is safe to let go. You stop bracing against life. You stop rehearsing disappointment. You stop waiting for permission to feel at peace. Peace is no longer something you pursue, it is something you allow. And in allowing it, you realize it was never absent, only overshadowed by noise. You stand now in quiet alignment, not needing to announce your faith, not needing to defend your trust. It is felt in the steadiness of your presence, in the gentleness of your responses, in the way you no longer rush past yourself. You understand that life does not require your constant supervision. It requires your participation, your openness, your willingness to listen more than you demand. And so you move forward, not driven by urgency, but guided by clarity, not pushed by fear, but drawn by resonance. You are no longer trying to outrun uncertainty. You are walking with it, knowing it is simply the space where something new is forming. You trust that when the next step is ready, it will reveal itself, not all at once, not with drama, but with the unmistakable calm of rightness. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. You were never meant to struggle your way into alignment. You were meant to remember it. God has been with you in every breath, every pause, every moment of waiting that taught you how to listen instead of grasp. And now, as you rest in this remembrance, you understand that what is meant for you does not need to be chased. It arrives when you are present enough to receive it. Remain here in this gentle knowing. Let life come to you. Let clarity rise when it is ready. Let trust be your way of walking. There is nothing missing from this moment, nothing unfinished in your being. You are already home, already guided, already held exactly where you are, exactly as you are, exactly now.